They say we should have known better than to fall so deep down into this rabbit hole we found. And I was thinking.
Hi, this is Nikolai, and you're listening to my dad, Rafal, co-host James Jardian, and featuring Mr. Jim Tiller on the one and only Down the Security Rabbit Hole podcast. Plug in, listen up, and enjoy.
Deep into this pool of regrettable situations. Pitch black, think back to the last time that we were
happy. I love it. That intro just never gets old. It's been since almost the very beginning, and I still love it. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. Welcome down the Security Rabbit Hole to another edition of the Down the Security Rabbit Hole podcast. This is Raph over to my that way. I'm figuring this out. Mirror imaging on video calls still screws me up. Hey, Jim.
Hey, man, it's gonna be a good one. Finally, it's sunny out. I don't know about how you guys been with weather lately, but between snow and rain and ice,
it's 73 degrees, crystal clear skies. It's awesome. And so this is the sunny podcast because I'm sunny, you're sunny. Arash, I'm pretty sure it's sunny where you are. Give us a quick intro.
It is. Hey, nice to meet everyone. Yeah, it's great out here right now. Dallas, we had a couple of snowstorms or ice storms this year, but at the moment it's peak Texas weather, so enjoying it.
And Bryan, give us a hello and where are you coming from?
I'm based in Austin, so just south of where Arash is. Okay. So yeah, it's been. I'll say it was cold the last 2 weeks, unseasonably cold, but it has been fantastic this week. So it's a great time to be in Austin and enjoying some time outside.
Excelente. All right. So this episode, and you guys know if you've listened for a bit that. We've got the guests that don't show up on other podcasts because this is we try to go a little bit outside that circle, and these two fine gentlemen have put up with me at two different companies in their product management roles, and I say that because I can be pretty demanding, as both of them will tell you, but it is a really interesting thing for us to talk about. Me personally, because I've always marveled at the ability to innovate, maintain, drive strategy, but also like take customer input that doesn't drive you off a cliff. And we can joke and laugh about that later. But that is a very, very real thing, I think. And so do you guys want to give us a little background on kind of how, where you guys, where you've been the last couple of years? Arash, I'll start with you.
Sure. Yeah, absolutely. So I've had some interesting twists and turns in my career. Spent obviously time in cybersecurity, before that in AI, what's called AI now, but ML and analytics. Prior to that in infrastructure. And then after my stint in cybersecurity, I went into a company that was focused on kind of edge computing as well as just general security solutions like firewalls. And then the past few years, Raph, I have been in finance agriculture, taking a short break from security, but nonetheless still extremely plugged into the sector, if that makes sense. So.
I love that. Finance agriculture. That's amazing.
Yes. Is that where the money trees grow?
That is exactly where the money trees grow. So
I hope you're growing the money trees.
We're financing the growing of the money trees. What you're trying to do is use as little money as possible to grow as many trees.
As much money. Yes. Exactly. Right, I love it. All right, Bryan, little about you.
Yeah, sure. So actually a little bit similar. So I started out in the analytics space and doing development in that area. And then, I've kind of had three phases of my career, right? So, which I think is typical in product management. It's usually not the first thing you do, right out of school. So I was a developer in the analytics space, spent some time doing management consulting on the strategy side, about 5 years doing that for software companies. And then when my wife and I, my son was born, my wife's like, hey, you need to get off the road, buddy. So ended up joining Dell at that point and doing corporate strategy for them, and ended up being assigned to as head of strategy for the endpoint security business at Dell. And that was kind of my entry into the fantastic world of cybersecurity. And so I've been doing, ever since then, I've been doing security product leadership roles for now about the last 15 years. So been doing it on the endpoint side, spent about half my time on the endpoint side, about half the time on the network side. So I've kind of gotten to see both sides of the coin.
Okay, so great place to start. What is in your opinion, the sort of whether it's security products or not? I've been in the world of security products almost my entire career. So whether it's on the vendor side, I've been on the development side as well for a bit. I was the world's worst developer for a very short period of time, which is why that was short. But give me a sense of kind of how the life cycle works. And either of you guys jump in, like how that works, right? Because from the customer side, what we see is, hey, new versions coming out. Hey, new versions coming out. Hey, new stuff's coming out. Like, talk to me about how we go from idea to some level of minimally viable product to something stable to something deployed to customers, and then like there's steps in between and cycles and rinse and repeat stuff. Either of you guys.
I'm happy to break the ice if it works for Bryan. There's a lot of different approaches to it. The short of it, at least in my career, has always come down to, when you're selecting what you're going to build before you get into the rest of it, if you will, it's figuring out what's going to make the biggest impact to your clients, right? As well as your market expansion or growth. And so what you're playing with is this concept of how much do I feed into enhancing a feature that I have now versus what are my competitors doing versus what is my client base asking for versus where's the market going, right? Like what's the new hot sector, what's happening, what's drawing attention, where's the buzz, and balancing those out and listening to the RAFs of the world, obviously too, right? The customer advocates within the business that bring ideas, they bring problems, they bring the challenges right into the conversation to say, hey, I get it, I know all this is happening, but I got a customer that's got this problem right now today, and there's 5 others just like him, right, in that same model too. So it becomes this continual kind of give and take where you're looking at all these variables, and it's, in my mind, it's both a bit scientific as well as there's a bit of an art to it, where you're kind of placing logical bets on what the right next thing to build is. And an important component of that is, what is the company strategy too, right? Every company has a different approach to market. Who is it? What's the company identity? How does it want to be known? What does it want to be known for? And you kind of have to build these concepts into ultimately how you make that decision, or at least in the product role, propose that right solution and where we want to go, and then influence everyone else to get on board with that too, which is part of the fun of I think my job and Bryan's as well. So that's a quick high level. I'll take a break there. Bryan, thoughts?
Yeah, no, I think that was a fantastic synopsis of it. Maybe one thing to add on here, and not to jump ahead, but I think, it can be a little bit different at different stages, right? So I've had the opportunity to work in early stage, startup phase, in growth stage, and in very, mature stage. So, let me give you an example. I think like in early stage companies, right, it's you're trying to build, in startups, you're trying to build enough features to really compete in that market. And a lot of companies try to build as many features as fast as possible to compete in whatever market they've decided they want to compete in. And that's, a typical approach, but probably, not the best approach, right? But a better approach is usually kind of focusing on a specific customer problem to solve, and then, making sure you're integrating with the rest of the stack, and then kind of going from there. So I think it's really interesting how the different phases, whether it's startup phase, growth stage, or mature company, how that journey of deciding what you're going to build next is different.
Yeah, I love that one. Okay, if you guys don't mind me adding one thing to that too, Bryan, triggered a great concept for me too. When you talk about MVP, and you asked this earlier too, Raph, like, what does MVP mean, right? Does it mean I've got a marketing one-pager with a lot of great bullet points on it that I'm trying to sell against? Or does MVP mean sometimes, or does it mean I have a great product that solves a customer need that is really easy to assign a cost to say, here's your problem, here's the cost, here's the solution, and why we can actually help your business significantly moving forward. And it's such an interesting conundrum, and Bryan nailed it. I've had the same experience. The startups I've been at versus like the large enterprises or the in-betweens, everyone uses a little bit of a different model, and it comes down to culture, philosophy of the company. I know I have my own preference. I'm sure Bryan does too. I always prefer trying to build the thing that's really easy to tie back to the problem, right? Because I feel like that's an easier sell than it is putting a marketing slick in front of someone and checking boxes. But then when they get the product, oh man, some of those boxes are pretty loosely checked.
Indeed.
Yeah.
Go ahead, Jim.
Oh, sorry. Go ahead. So this is interesting for me because this is the least amount of experience representative of my entire career, right? I've never worked, yes, HP, stuff like that, but I never worked in the product side of the business. So my exposure to product development has been just watching vendors go through the process and people that I've known that I've at least collaborated with to, add my 2 cents, whatever the case may be. And you kind of started touching on some of this, but from the outside looking in, it seems like you have a vast number of potentially extremely competing views on what should be done, right? So you probably have your UI people and your designers, and you probably have the guys that really think this is a cool feature and we can do it. And then maybe the marketing team wants to sell it this way. And you're sitting here trying to go, how do I organize all these, I won't say emotional, but these sort of maybe passionate things that people have. I see you guys laughing, so I think I may have struck a chord.
Yeah, I like to, and there's different frameworks, right? But the framework I like to use is thinking about it into 3 buckets, right? So we'll go bottoms up, right? At the bottom, you have to have a specific or some percentage of your resources and the features you develop allocated to, what we'll call technical debt or core technology work, right? Making sure to improve the security, making sure to build a scaled platform for the future. Then the next category would be what I'd call kind of technical customer delight features, right? So a lot of that comes feedback directly from your customers and comes directly from, hey, it would make our lives easier if you added this, or if you changed this workflow or this capability or added this detector to solve this specific problem. And then the third bucket, and probably the most exciting, most interesting in a lot of cases, is the strategic bucket. And that's where you're doing a lot of work to think about, okay, what's next, and what's problem are we going to try to solve next, and how are we going to solve that problem, and what are we seeing in the different attack models and across the industry, that will drive future growth in the platform. So that's kind of how I like to break it down.
Yeah, I've had the same approach as Bryan, right? Like balancing those buckets as far as what are the things that you're going to build. There's also other kind of prioritization structure you can apply to it, and frankly, I find them to be good guides, but not, the ones that you'll always use. There's this concept of weighted shortest job first, or Kona or Rice, and these different models that folks have kind of devised over time really all take in 3 or 4 things into account. One is like, what's the customer impact of this? How hard is it to build, or what's my cost of doing it? What's the strategic component? Like, what's it going to really solve for in market, and what kind of TAM or market share does it open up for me if I go do it? And then, is it a differentiator, right? Does it enable me to play different games down the road, right? Is it something I can build on, and where do I go with it? So you start kind of taking these things into account. You also take the volume of requests into account. There's no perfect solution. They always say what the squeaky wheel gets the grease. Unfortunately, there is some truth to that. Right. And I think what comes down to really good roadmap management is making sure you have room in your kind of development pipeline, your total capacity, to try to fit in a little bit of all of these pieces so you're moving stuff forward. Another one, I'm sure Bryan's run into this as well, but you also have to kind of manage. Sometimes there are chunks of time or quarters where you're really focused on, I got to pay down some technical debt because we spent 2 quarters building just net new features and we let some things lag, and you kind of have to balance that out. The more you keep on top of it, the better. But of course, you've got these ebbs and flows and development cycles that you've got to account for.
Yeah, that's a great point. I mean, and these problems crop up a lot in kind of growth stage companies as well as, mature companies. And, I think it really comes down to your, VOC or voice of customer. I think that's really important for a product team, is spend a lot of time getting a broad set of voice of customer. And that can help you kind of combat the squeaky wheel problem, that you mentioned. So, in the past, we've done, tried to do a really good job of having a lot of customer meetings, having a lot of customer interactions, and then taking a very data-driven approach of trying to pattern match, okay, how many customers are having a specific problem? And usually they're worded a little bit differently, so that it takes a lot of, human work to kind of do that pattern matching, because it's not exactly phrased the right way, but to try to get, align a set of problems and then identify how many customers are having that problem and would benefit from a particular solution. And that basically kind of allows you to see through that squeaky wheel challenge that we talked about.
So yeah, I've written a bunch of stuff down on my whiteboard here to ask next. And so many questions. Like this is not 30 minutes worth of podcast material, but I want to ask, how do you weight so in a growth stage company, right? Because Arash, that's kind of what we worked in ish. And Bryan, that's definitely where we met. In that kind of growth stage company where you've got a product that people are already using, the market recognizes, there's competition, right? It's largely a do it better, do more of it kind of a situation versus your competitors. How do you weight the development of new product features or additional product features, right, for a particular customer, a particular set of customers, existing customers, versus if we could build this, these new customers would be unlocked for us? Like, how do you weight that? Because there's a CSAT component to it. Like, you want to keep your customers happy, right? Because you want to keep building for them, but you have to go get new ones. And it's not like you can do both because there's a finite amount of dollars and resources you can spend. Bryan, how do you do that? Because I think your methodology is interesting.
Yeah, I mean, that's a fantastic question, and that happens, a lot at the growth stage. In fact, I've seen it done. I've seen it done correctly and maybe not correctly before. So sometimes I think one of the traps that you fall in the growth stage is companies are at that stage, whether it's somewhere between 100 and let's call it 500 million in ARR, right? You're focusing everything you can on how do you drive growth, and a lot of times companies get into this trap of, all right, well, let's keep adding capabilities to this platform, whether they're separate modules or things you can monetize, and let's keep adding and giving the sales team something new to sell. And that sometimes if it's done thoughtfully, that can work. But the challenge is the more you spread your development resources across multiple problems, that you can't go as deep into each of those problems, and you actually end up not solving those problems well for your particular customers. And it's always a trade-off, right? So every increment of resource you spend on trying to create a new module or a new capability that can generate revenue, it's a increment of resource that you're not spending deepening your core. And then your competitors are potentially getting ahead of you or leapfrogging you. Or even worse, the attackers and the adversaries are investing to consistently get ahead of you. So it's always a balance, and it's really hard. I'd say what I've learned from it is more people fall down the trap, or more companies have challenges with spreading themselves too thin versus actually focusing on what they want to do and what they want to accomplish. You've got to have really strong alignment between the company vision, the company strategy, and what your product strategy is.
Bryan, I want to follow up just real quick before Arash jumps in, because this is an area that I think is so easy to overlook, but you guys have both done it well, and that is, you don't work in a vacuum. Like, you don't just say, hey, I'm going to release this new product. You have to make sure marketing's on board, sales is on board, support is on board. Otherwise, you keep piling a mountain of new things onto your support team, and eventually you overwhelm them. And it doesn't matter how many features you have, because they don't, like, it doesn't make it that great of an impact as you think it does. How do you balance that? How do you incorporate those teams in?
Yeah, it's really, really important. And that's a great point. So, driving alignment across the cross-functional stakeholders, sales, marketing, support, is a critical job of any product leader, right? So tactically, you've got to have a step in your process where you're, reviewing every quarter, you're reviewing your product strategy and reviewing your roadmap before it's developed with your key stakeholders, getting their feedback. So the entire company and all the leaders of those functions and those key stakeholders feel like they're bought in to the overall vision and to the overall roadmap that the team is driving.
So I just got to say, I'm just enthralled by just the level of complexity of all the moving parts. I think people go, oh, product management. It's like you guys are literally just going of these giant problems, okay? And I'm sitting here the whole time you're talking, going, how do you prioritize? How do you communicate? How do you stay on schedule? How do you keep these priorities aligned? And so I'm gonna get right to the point of my next question, which is, what happens when you have to change trajectory, right? So there's a thing happens, right? So all of a sudden, maybe you have to recalculate here, you have to redevelop here. How do you deal with the unpredictable situations? I mean, I can sit here and say, how do you deal with, like, security vulnerabilities, and it like redirects you crazily? That's too easy. I think there's bigger and nastier ones out there, right? So how do you deal with the black swan events kind of thing when it comes to product development?
Yeah, that's an interesting question on that side. So there's, operationally, there are ways that we will manage it, right? And that's how we're managing a roadmap, or the velocity of the teams and the schedule and all the pieces, and how much room you have to do things, if you will, or what can move. But I think a little bit of this comes down to actually what Bryan was sharing too, which is the strategy has to align top to bottom in the organization. And that's one of the areas I've always seen kind of falter with those changes, has been that something new comes in and it's a little bit of shiny object syndrome. It may not actually align well with the strategy of the company or even the market that it's in or how it's playing. And so being able to understand and break that down in one of two ways. So Jim, sometimes those ideas are great and like we should go do them. And sometimes they're actually really bad and we probably shouldn't do them. And the analysis that the product teams have to go put together, and this kind of going back to what Bryan was sharing too, is I started a startup after school. Like, I did that for 4 years. And so, School of Hard Knocks, you learn how to build a business plan, build a financial model, do market analysis, do market research, talk to customers. And that's where the data gathering component really starts to come into play, because you have to very quickly be able to look at an idea and say, either this is, hey, viable, and figure out what the priority, what the importance should be and how it fits into the strategy, or you know what, I'm gonna be a little mean saying it, but sometimes it's trash, and that's okay. So ideas can be amazing and they can also be trash. But you have to prove that or show that in a tangible, logical, rational way. It cannot be emotional, back to the statement you made earlier about the emotions coming into it. So it's a really interesting kind of dance. And I'll make a joke, which is, what's the difference between influencing, which is what a good product leader or product team does? They influence the direction of the company and the outcomes, versus manipulation. The only difference is intent, right? And the intent is shown by the quality of analysis and logic and thought that goes into what we put on the table to look at and invest in the company.
All right, since you've both said it, I want to jump in and ask the roadmap question, because roadmaps to me are absolutely like bubbling cauldron black magic. How do you guys even go about setting direction? Like, to say, we're working on this feature right now, we're going to release it this quarter, great. I could do that. But to say 3 quarters out, right? And I get it, Arash, we've had this discussion over beers in the back halls of our company that we worked at together.
We have.
About like short term, you give dates and concrete, and the further out you go, the less concrete it gets. But that is still amazing to me. Like, how do you even put together a roadmap?
Yeah, it's a great question. I'll take a first pass at it. So I'll link to something I said earlier, right? You have to think about, product building in those three buckets that I talked about earlier. The building the platform, scaling the platform with your technical, or paying off technical debt. There's the more tactical customer delight features, and there's the more strategic forward-looking features. So, as a product leader, what my job is to work with the executive team, work with all the key stakeholders, the heads of sales, heads of marketing, heads of support, heads of customer success, and to get alignment on the overall strategy and the vision for where we want the product to be, a year from now, 2 years from now, and then provide guidance to the teams on, hey, in 2 years, kind of here's what we want the product to look like from an overall vision perspective at a very high level. And then, the concept of empowered, product teams, right? So then you give however many product teams you have in whatever areas and customer problems they're focused on, and hopefully you have specific product teams focused on specific customer problems. They work together, and that's product management, that's engineering, that's design. They all work together to figure out, okay, what's the roadmap to both solve, to get to this long-term strategic vision, as well as every single quarter layering on top of that, tactical, customer delight features that you get from, submitted from customers, or you hear about during your voice of customer sessions, and layering in on that also features or work to build and scale the platform. And those all have to be balanced, over multiple quarters. And I whether you publish them or not to the organization, I always like to have my teams have at least a 4 to 6 quarter roadmap out. And their stakes in the ground, they can be adjusted, but so they're actually thinking about, what they're going to be developing this quarter, next quarter, the following quarter.
Yeah, Bryan's spot on. The approach, I think, is going to be the same across most of the good product management teams are going to tackle it that way. There's also another element that, sometimes we'll leverage, or I've run across or used in my teams, which is the question of answering, what's the most important thing this quarter and why? And that's kind of a question you want to answer as you get into each quarter, or, your however you time box your work, right? Or your roadmaps, with the intention of saying, is the thing I am doing getting me closer to that vision, right? That 2-year mark of where we want to be as a platform, as a product, specifically as a company. And then asking all the sub questions, like, if I build this thing, how will it be consumed? Because that's where your scope and the impact of taking a solution to market also changes. You kind of talked about you guys were talking about the concept of a company that's got one product and might need to diversify into a second product. They're looking for a new market growth opportunity, or, hey, it's my core product, but I've got this opportunity to improve my features. And this is where you have to start asking the question of, what's my go-to-market look like for both of these as well? Is it sold through channel? What's my pricing model? What's the cost of developing this? And these are things you have to get ahead of. And a lot of companies, very frankly, will stumble into it and they'll just go do it without thinking about the repercussions of these things. And that's where you run into the challenge of, I'm having a product market fit problem because I didn't answer these questions early on and really, it wasn't critical, right? And you have to be honest with yourself. Like, you've got to take ego and excitement out of a lot of these. You may still individually be excited about, like, this is cool, let's go do it. But you've got to take a lot of that out of the equation and say, logically, what's the right thing to do? And then, the art of it comes into the, how do you put it into the roadmap?
Right. But I mean, here's the funny thing, right? And I don't know people that are outside of product, I've never been in a company where you lack good ideas, right? I mean, there's a lot of smart people at cybersecurity companies and all across different functions. And everyone's got a great idea of, hey, if we can add this, or let's go into this market. Cloud security is a great example. Oh, hey, company XYZ, Wiz, for example, is growing really fast and has a great valuation, and we should go enter the cloud security market because that market seems really attractive, and there's a bunch of companies doing really great. But the question you have to answer from a product perspective is, there's a lot of companies trying to solve that problem, and a lot of dollars trying to solve that problem. Do you want to divert your finite resources to try to go solve that problem, and can you catch up or leapfrog the existing competitors in that particular problem they're solving, versus investing more in the space and the problem that you've already taken to solve? And I think that's some of the biggest challenges when you're thinking about prioritizing your strategic areas.
Yeah. So what happens when, and I think this has happened in both of the companies you guys were in. What happens when you've got your roadmap, you're delivering, and then suddenly somebody shows up a little higher up, usually attached to a bucket of money, and says, "Cute ideas, but we're going this way now."
Right.
I'll be happy to jump on that one. That's always a tough one. But one of the important things in the product role is also knowing when to say no and how to say no. Not to say that idea that's attached to the money isn't a good one. And that's where the analysis and the breakdown, where you've got to get really logical about it and put a business case and really a small business plan together on like what the impact of this solution is. It's also sometimes the answer, once you do that analysis or you look at it, is, yeah, this is actually, I know there's money attached to it, but this is going to misalign us with the market. It's going to be a one-off. It may be in many other kind of situations that come up. It may not scale well. It may be really hard to market and position down the road. So there's lots of different variables that you would look at from that standpoint. So saying no is a thing, and how you do it is really important, right? Because as Bryan mentioned, and I called out too, there's this element where the product role is very influence driven in a business. In some companies it runs development, in some companies it doesn't, in some companies it may own other aspects or element. Some CPOs have marketing reporting to them, and some don't. It's just every company is a little bit different from that standpoint. So influence is a big part of how you kind of ensure or talk through that. Where do we go with this idea and why, right? So short answer is no is sometimes okay.
Fair point. Let me. We're running a little bit on up to our time, but I've got one more for you, and I think this is a good place to end it. Talk to me. You guys have both mentioned it. Advise, customers. Talk to me about the role of the CAB, the Customer Advisory Board, the group that is already paid you and paying you on renewals, and balancing the direction that they are giving you, right? That they're saying, this is the better way, this is the thing, versus your intuition saying, yeah, but we're thinking about, there's a little push and pull, right? There's a little tug. Talk to me about balancing that and how the role of the CAB works.
Yeah, it's a fantastic question. So, when you get to, let's say growth stage, and let's say you have, more than 1,000 customers. That CAB is usually going to be, be comprised of somewhere in your top 20 to 30 customers, right? You're not going to get all of them to participate. So, yeah. They're going to be represented by your top 30, customers, very large enterprises. So I think it's a really, really important, the CAB's a really important tool for voice of customer. And, having that dialogue and getting feedback on some of the direction you want to go with the product, and getting feedback on, where you might want to go is really important. But there's also, I think it's also equally as important to get feedback from other customers outside the CAB, right? Because the challenge with the CABs is sometimes they come from the technical side, sometimes and the user side, sometimes they're not, they're more on the buyer side or more on the leadership side. So you have to make sure you're balancing the views of the buyer, or maybe the CISO level, as well as the director of the SOC level, as well as the security analyst level. And you have to balance all those different roles, because you have a lot of different users and roles of the product, and the needs of different size companies, right? You don't want to skew your roadmap to only serve those, Fortune 500, unless your company strategy is to only serve the Fortune 500.
Yeah.
Most companies have to have different, segments and different size of customers. And so, it's incumbent upon that product team to make sure you're balancing that voice of customer feedback from different roles as well as different sizes of companies.
Arash,
I'll
one
answer
for
that a
you.
little more. Yeah.
Yeah,
I was going to say
this-
that's a little more controversial. I would say cabs are a mixed bag, and getting to the root of the problem in those conversations is probably one of the hardest things to do.
Yeah. So along those lines, and I wanted to do a follow-up for this. How do you keep, and so balancing, how do you keep sometimes we'll call this your current company's board or CEO's favorite customers, or the ones that have paid the most, from having an outsized influence simply because they're sitting there in the room with you and they have they have that physical influence?
Yeah. I think that's a tough one. I'm sure Bryan runs across this all the time too, which is you want to take their voice and you want to listen to what's going on, but you have to also understand and be able to prove or demonstrate that this problem that they have is market wide and not individualistic to them. It doesn't mean that sometimes you don't go do individual things for these clients. And frankly, there's different models you can apply to, right? Sometimes these are paid, almost, paid features, right? Where they pay to have it developed at a certain company. And it's unique to them, or it's exclusive to them, or there's some licensing, considerations that take into account there. But a lot of it comes back down to just, understanding if you can get to the root cause of or the root of the problem, and then look at how that problem is manifesting in different ways. Can one solution solve for multiple problems across multiple companies and industries or sectors? And those are the ones that, you always say, my priority as a company should be on that, because my total addressable market is how this company grows. And that's the number one, pathway to success for the business. So
I love it.
That's spot on. The pattern matching piece is really important. And there's a lot of tools that can help with that. But, basically documenting and being data driven on, hey, there's this particular customer problem or customer need that we're solving, and how many different customers are we going to be able to solve this problem for by implementing a particular feature. And then of course you take into account, what are the different sizes of those customers and how much, revenue are they contributing to the business. But that's not the only factor. If you, again, if you only develop features for your largest 15 customers, you're going to end up with a platform that does a great job of serving the largest customers in the enterprise, but doesn't serve any other segment in the market, which can be a challenge from a growth perspective.
All right, one last one, and then I'll let you guys go, I promise. Arash, I've never seen you meet a whiteboard you haven't been able to fill. But beyond that, what do you guys use from a tools perspective? Like, what do you? I mean, whiteboards obviously are important, but they're not so portable. What do you use?
So there are digital whiteboards now, which is great, to be very frank, especially in the age of remote work. There's a lot of great tools online. I won't use any tool names per se, just to not, specifically call one out, but really digital whiteboarding tools, or whiteboards in general, something to just get the idea down on paper. You're going to use financial analysis, right? And planning, kind of that FP&A concept comes in the product. And so there's a lot of product folks, or I should say there's some, maybe not a lot, but there's some that are really good at also breaking down the financials and implications and looking at cost models and P&L. They understand all that stuff really well. So those types of tooling. So Excel comes into play. PowerPoint, as much as I hate it, is a common tool for product teams to try to convey an outcome or an action, and hopefully as few bullet points and less, as little fluff as possible, but, a way just to communicate the concept. We have road mapping tools. There's a number of really great ones out there as well that we'll leverage, that are just helping you figure out the size of the box and where to put it in. It's kind of a visual tool, if you will, that's pulling in from other platforms like Jira. I used the tool name, sorry. Let's call them your
that one everybody knows.
Plus. Everyone uses. And there's several others. It's not the only one. There's Rally, there's Jira, there's a few others that are really great. But that's pulling upwards into those. You also have client, you have your client or your customer input, right? We were talking about the cab earlier. So what are the set of tools you use to capture customer input directly and feedback from the platform? There's also monitoring tools that show me, I can do a session record on the last time you used one of my platforms or my products and go see, what did Raf click on? How mad did he get when he clicked on X or Y? And so those recording tools or session monitoring tools also help you understand everything from adoption of the feature or adoption of the capability, frustrations or dead ends with bad user experience that you need to go fix or improve. So you're using kind of all these tools across the board, and they apply to different points in time often of that feature being live, from idea all the way to, it's now in someone's hands. But these are just some that I would call out.
Yeah, that's a great list. I mean, I'd say the other thing, or one other tool category that wasn't listed, that I think is really important, is your wireframing or your design tool. One thing that I talk with my teams about all the time is, hey, let's make sure we're getting potential product designs in front of customers before we develop them. And getting these concepts and getting feedback from customers ahead of time is really, really important. So if you've put a design or a wireframe in front of 10, 15, 20 different customers before you even start developing that feature, you have a much, much higher likelihood of getting it right the first time versus kind of building and then getting feedback and then iterating, which can work as well, but there's cost to that iteration process.
Doing it at every step, to Bryan's point, is so important. At the ideation phase, when you've got an idea, you want to vet that idea outside of all the other analysis you're doing. When you get to design, you're doing the same thing. When you kind of got the first generation built, you're going to do the same thing. And if you do this continually, it will ensure that you don't miss the mark when you actually get that feature to market at the end of the day.
Right.
The other thing that came to mind when we brought this up is there's so much data and so many tools that you mentioned, right? From a category perspective, that's one of the hardest things of the product management role, right? Is that it is such a cross-functional. You're really looking for really hard to find set of skills when you have to be deep technically, you have to be deep from the business side, you have to be deep from the analytics side, you have to be able to leverage all these different types of tools to get strong alignment across the organization. It's really another great illustration of how challenging the role is.
All right. Well, that is a reasonably good place to end it. We could do this. I think we should do this again. Kind of dive maybe a little bit deeper on this. But you guys, thanks for sharing your expertise. We ran over and Jim had to drop, and so I lost that. But I appreciate you guys jumping on. It is, I'll tell you, every org that I've been a part of, I find myself, we'll say, gently butting heads with product management at the start, and then the more I get a chance to meet the people that you guys, the more I realize, like, holy crap, this is really hard, and like getting the buy-in's important, right? So I appreciate you guys sitting down. This is a very, very complicated topic. You guys both do it you surprise people every day with some of the crazy things you get done in the time periods you get it done with, the amount of resources you get it done with. So we appreciate you, and this has been great. Thanks, folks, for listening. Arash, thanks for joining. Bryan, great having you aboard. Good to see both of you guys again. We'll do this again sometime. And for the Down to Security Rabbit Hole podcast, thanks for listening, you guys. We'll catch you another time, another place on yet another Down the Security Rabbit Hole podcast. That's it. We're gone. See you later. Bye.